Nobody knew what he would do when he found his brother's body hanging from the old oak tree behind the church. Nobody knew that Tom McKinley had been keeping a secret for 15 years, a secret that would tear apart the very foundation of Dusty Creek, Texas. Dusty Creek Cemetery, dawn. The morning mist clings to weathered headstones like ghosts unwilling to leave. A lone figure kneels beside a fresh grave, his weathered hands placing wildflowers on the disturbed earth. This is Thomas McKinley, 45, a man whose silence speaks louder than most men's words. Tom McKinley never spoke unless spoken to. Never raised his voice, never raised his hand in anger. But on that morning in 1887, when he discovered his brother Samuel's lifeless body swaying in the Texas wind, something broke inside him that would never heal. The camera pulls back to reveal the vast emptiness of the cemetery, with Tom's silhouette small against the endless prairie sky. What he didn't know was that 15 years later, a young woman would stand before the entire town and reveal the truth that would make him a hero, and destroy everything Dusty Creek thought it knew about justice. Dusty Creek Main Street, 1887 morning. The sun rises over a typical frontier town. Wooden buildings line a dusty Main Street. The sound of horses' hooves, creaking wagon wheels, and the distant lowing of cattle fill the air. The smell of wood smoke and fresh bread drifts from the bakery. Dusty Creek was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody's business, or thought they did. Nestled between rolling hills and endless prairie, it survived on cattle ranching, farming, and the occasional traveler heading west. Tom McKinley rides slowly down Main Street on his chestnut mare, Belle. His clothes are simple but clean, worn leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and a black hat that's seen better days. People nod respectfully as he passes, but there's something distant in their acknowledgement. Tom worked the Circle M Ranch just outside town, a modest spread he'd inherited from his father. He wasn't rich, wasn't poor, wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. But in a town where talking was considered an art form, his silence made people uncomfortable. General store, continuous. Tom enters the store, the bell above the door chiming softly. Martha Stevens, 50s, the storekeeper's wife, looks up from behind the counter. Her smile is polite but strained. Martha. Morning, Tom. The usual? Tom nods. Yes, ma'am. Coffee, flour, and salt. Martha. Counting out his items. Haven't seen Samuel in church lately. He doing all right? Tom. After a pause. He's managing. That was Tom, never more words than necessary, never an explanation when a nod would do. But if you looked closely, you could see the worry lines around his eyes when anyone mentioned his younger brother. Circle M Ranch, late afternoon. A modest ranch house sits surrounded by grazing land. Tom unsaddles Belle near a small barn. The wind carries the scent of prairie grass and the distant sound of cattle. A small vegetable garden grows near the house, carefully tended, everything in its place. Tom's ranch was like Tom himself, quiet, orderly, and sturdy. He'd built most of it with his own hands after their father died, leaving room for Samuel to help, when Samuel was sober enough to work. Tom sits on his porch, whittling a piece of wood as the sun sets. The loneliness is palpable, not the loneliness of a man who can't find company, but of a man who's chosen solitude over the complexity of human relationships. People in Dusty Creek respected Tom McKinley. They respected his work ethic, his honesty, his reliability. But they didn't understand him. How could they? He was a man who believed actions spoke louder than words, in a world where words were often all people had. Dusty Creek Saloon evening. Through the window, we see Samuel McKinley, 38, Tom's younger brother, drinking at the bar. He's handsome in a rough way, with an easy smile and animated gestures as he tells stories to anyone who'll listen. The contrast to Tom couldn't be more stark. Samuel was everything Tom wasn't: talkative, charming, quick to laugh and quicker to anger. Where Tom saved his money, Samuel spent it. Where Tom kept his word, Samuel made promises he couldn't keep. But he was still Tom's brother, and in Tom's world, that meant something. Tom approaches the saloon but doesn't enter. He stands in the shadows, watching his brother through the window. Samuel catches sight of him and waves drunkenly. Tom tips his hat and walks away. Tom had been taking care of Samuel since their mother died when they were boys. It was a responsibility he'd never questioned, never resented, at least not out loud. But watching his brother destroy himself one drink at a time was wearing him down in ways he'd never admit. EXT, Dusty Creek Church, Sunday morning. The small wooden church sits on a hill overlooking the town. People in their Sunday best gather outside, talking in small groups before service. Tom arrives alone, nodding to neighbors who acknowledge him with varying degrees of warmth. Sundays were the hardest for Tom. Not because he wasn't religious, he was, in his own quiet way. But because Sundays meant sitting alone in a pew, fielding questions about Samuel's absence, and feeling the weight of the town's unspoken judgment. Reverend James Bolton, 55, a stern man with kind eyes, approaches Tom as he's about to enter the church. Reverend Bolton. Tom, might I have a word? Tom stops, removes his hat. Of course, Reverend. Reverend Bolton. It's about Samuel. There was an incident at the saloon last night. Tom waits silently for more information. Reverend Bolton. He got into it with Chester Wade over a card game. Things got heated. Chester's claiming Samuel cheated. Tom. After a long pause. Did he? Reverend Bolton. Sighs. I don't know, Tom. But Chester's got influence in this town. He's been talking to folks, saying maybe it's time Samuel moved on. Chester Wade owned the largest ranch in the county and had the mayor's ear. He was the kind of man who smiled to your face and stabbed you in the back, the kind of man who understood that in a small town, reputation was everything. Int. Dusty Creek Church, continuous. Tom sits in his usual pew, third row from the back, left side. The church is small but well-maintained, with simple wooden pews and stained glass windows that cast colorful light across the congregation. As Reverend Bolton preached about forgiveness and redemption, Tom felt the eyes of the congregation on him. He could hear the whispered conversations, the subtle judgments. Poor Tom, they'd say. What a burden that brother of his must be. Mary Catherine Wade, 30s, Chester's wife, turns to whisper to her friend, glancing at Tom. He pretends not to notice, but his jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Reverend Bolton. From the pulpit. Judge not, that ye be not judged. The good book tells us that we are all sinners in need of grace. None of us is perfect, and none of us has the right to cast stones at our neighbors. Tom wondered if the Reverend's words were meant for him or for the people whispering behind their hands. Either way, he felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat. EXT, Circle M Ranch, that afternoon. Tom works alone, mending a fence. The work is methodical, precise, each post checked, each wire secured. It's the kind of work that requires attention to detail, and Tom finds peace in it. A horse approaches at a gallop. Samuel rides up, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face flushed with drink and anger. Samuel. Dismounting roughly. Tom. You hear what that snake Chester Wade is saying about me? Tom. Continues working. I heard. Samuel. Kicks at a stone. He's lying. I never cheated at cards in my life. Tom looks up for the first time. Samuel, when's the last time you won at cards? Samuel, deflated. That's not the point. Tom goes back to work. Isn't it? This was how it always went. Samuel would create a problem, Tom would try to solve it, and Samuel would resent him for it. But Tom had learned long ago that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was to let them face the consequences of their choices. Samuel. After a long pause. Chester's trying to turn the whole town against me. Tom. Straightening up. Maybe it's time you gave them fewer reasons to listen. Samuel. Angry now. You think I'm the problem? You think I don't know what they say about us? Poor Tom McKinley, stuck with that worthless brother of his. Well, maybe I am worthless, but at least I'm not a coward. Tom. Quietly. Samuel. Samuel. Interrupting. No! I'm tired of you looking at me like I'm some kind of burden. I'm tired of you fixing my problems without even asking if I want them fixed. Tom watched his brother ride away, disappearing into the dust cloud kicked up by his horse's hooves. He'd seen Samuel angry before, but this felt different. This felt final. EXT, Dusty Creek Saloon, that evening. Tom stands across the street from the saloon, watching through the window. Samuel is inside, drinking heavily and talking animatedly to anyone who'll listen. Chester Wade is there too, holding court at his usual table. Tom had promised their mother on her deathbed that he'd take care of Samuel. But he was beginning to wonder if taking care of someone meant holding them up, or letting them fall. Inside the saloon, Samuel slams his fist on the bar. Even from across the street, Tom can see the tension building. Chester Wade stands up, his friends flanking him. Tom's hand moved instinctively to his gun belt, but he stopped himself. Walking into that saloon wouldn't solve anything, it would only make things worse. So he did what he always did. He watched, he waited, and he worried. Tom turns and walks away as the confrontation inside the saloon escalates. He doesn't see Samuel storm out the back door, doesn't see Chester Wade's satisfied smile, doesn't see the group of men who follow Samuel into the night. Tom sits on his porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He hasn't slept. Samuel's horse stands in the corral, but there's no sign of Samuel himself. Tom had sat on that porch all night, waiting for the sound of Samuel's boots on the wooden steps, waiting for another drunken argument or tearful apology. But dawn came without either. A neighbor, Henry Clark, 60s, rides up quickly, his face grave. Henry. Tom, you need to come with me. Now. Tom. Standing slowly. What is it? Henry. Struggling with the words. It's Samuel. Behind the church. Tom, he's gone. EXT, Dusty Creek Church, continuous. A crowd is gathered behind the small church. Tom approaches slowly, his boots crunching on the dry grass. The ancient oak tree that has stood behind the church for generations now holds a terrible burden. Samuel McKinley hung from the old oak tree like a broken marionette, his face peaceful in death in a way it had never been in life. A crude rope around his neck, his boots barely touching the ground. Tom stops walking. The crowd parts to let him through, their faces a mixture of sympathy and morbid curiosity. Reverend Bolton approaches, his hand outstretched. Reverend Bolton. Softly. Tom, I'm so sorry. We found him this morning. Tom. Staring at his brother's body. Did he leave anything? Reverend Bolton. shaking his head. No note, nothing. Sheriff's calling it, well, you know. Suicide. The word hung in the air like a curse. In 1887, suicide was more than just a tragedy, it was a sin, a mark of shame that would follow a family forever. Tom walks closer to the tree, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd. He looks up at his brother's face, and for the first time in years, Samuel looks at peace. Tom whispered, "I'm sorry, Samuel. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Sheriff William Turner, 50s, a practical man worn down by years of frontier justice, approaches Tom, *. Sheriff Turner. "Tom, I need to ask you some questions. When did you last see Samuel?" Tom, still staring at his brother. "Yesterday afternoon. We had words." Sheriff Turner. "What kind of words?" Tom, finally looking at the sheriff. "The kind brothers have." Tom answered the sheriff's questions with the same economy of words he brought to everything else. Yes, Samuel had been drinking. Yes, he'd been in trouble. No, he hadn't seemed any different than usual. Ext, Dusty Creek Church later. The crowd has dispersed. Samuel's body has been taken away. Tom stands alone beneath the oak tree, looking up at the rope that still hangs from the thick branch. Tom McKinley had buried his parents, buried friends, buried cattle and horses and dogs. But he'd never buried a brother. And he'd never buried someone who died with so many questions left unanswered. Tom reaches up and cuts the rope with his knife, letting it fall to the ground. He coils it carefully and puts it in his saddlebag. Tom, to himself, "You weren't a coward, Samuel. Whatever else you weren't a coward." But as Tom rode home that day, something nagged at him. Samuel had been many things, drunk, irresponsible, quick-tempered, but Tom had never known him to give up. Even at his lowest, Samuel had always believed tomorrow would be better. Tom stops his horse and looks back at the church, at the oak tree, at the town that had judged his brother and found him wanting. That's when Tom McKinley made a promise to himself. He would find out what really happened to Samuel, and he would make sure the truth was known. He owed his brother that much. A small group gathers around Samuel's grave. The service is brief, attended more out of obligation than affection. Tom stands apart from the others, his face a mask of controlled grief. They buried Samuel McKinley on a Tuesday morning, with a handful of people who felt sorry for Tom more than they mourned Samuel. The Reverend spoke about forgiveness and redemption, but Tom could see the judgment in people's eyes. After the service, Tom lingers by the grave. Margaret Thompson, 40s, a widow who runs the boarding house, approaches him. Margaret. Gently. "Tom, if you need anything." Tom. Nodding. "Thank you, Margaret." Margaret. Hesitating. "Tom, I saw Samuel that night. The night he died." Tom, looking at her directly. "Where?" Margaret, walking toward the church. But he wasn't alone. Tom, after a pause. "Who was with him?" Margaret, glancing around nervously. "I couldn't tell for sure. It was dark. But there were men. 3 or 4 of them." Tom filed this information away like he filed away everything else, carefully, methodically, without showing his hand. If Samuel hadn't killed himself, then someone had wanted him dead. And in a town like Dusty Creek, that kind of secret couldn't stay buried forever. Ext, Dusty Creek Saloon evening. Tom enters the saloon for the first time in years. The conversations stop as he walks to the bar. Jake Morrison, 45, the bartender, looks uncomfortable. Jake. Wiping down a glass. Tom. I'm sorry about Samuel. Tom. Ordering whiskey. Jake, the night Samuel died. Did he leave with anyone? Jake. Glancing at the other patrons. Tom, maybe we shouldn't. Tom. Interrupting quietly. Did he leave with anyone? Jake. After a long pause. Chester Wade and his boys were here. They left around the same time as Samuel. Tom drank his whiskey in silence, feeling the weight of curious eyes on him. He'd never been comfortable in crowds, but tonight he felt like a marked man. People whispered behind their hands, speculation and gossip mixing with the smell of tobacco and stale beer. From his corner table, Chester Wade watches Tom with calculating eyes. He's surrounded by his usual crew, Bobby Jenkins, Frank Moore, and Dusty Collins, men who do Chester's bidding without question. Chester. Loudly enough for Tom to hear. Shame about Samuel. But I guess some men just can't handle their troubles. Tom. Finishing his drink, not turning around. Some can't. Some don't have to. Chester. Standing up. What's that supposed to mean? Tom. Finally turning. Means a man's got to live with his choices. The saloon went dead quiet. Tom McKinley was known for avoiding confrontations, but there was something different about him tonight. Something dangerous. Chester. Approaching Tom. You got something to say to me, McKinley? Tom. Putting money on the bar. I got nothing to say to you, Chester. Tom walks toward the door, but Chester grabs his arm. Chester. Maybe you should be more careful about the company you keep. Some folks in this town are starting to wonder if the McKinley boys got more in common than just a name. Tom. Very quietly. Let go of my arm. Chester. Tightening his grip. Or what? Tom. Looking directly into Chester's eyes. Or you'll find out what the McKinley boys really have in common. Chester Wade had bullied half the town into submission, but something in Tom's voice made him release his grip. Tom walked out of the saloon without another word, leaving Chester to save face with his friends. EXT, Circle M Ranch, night. Tom sits on his porch, cleaning his father's old Colt revolver. The methodical action helps him think. Bell whinnies softly from the corral, and Tom looks up to see a rider approaching. Tom's hand moved instinctively to his gun, but he relaxed when he recognized the rider. It was Dr. Edwin Hayes, 55, the town's physician and one of the few people Tom considered a friend. Dr. Hayes. Dismounting. Tom, I need to talk to you about Samuel. Tom. Setting down the gun. What about him? Dr. Hayes. Sitting down heavily. I examined the body. Tom, the rope marks on his neck, they're not consistent with hanging. Tom. Very still. What are you saying? Dr. Hayes. Choosing his words carefully. I'm saying the marks go all the way around his neck, not just on one side like they would from a hanging. And there are bruises on his knuckles, like he fought back. Tom. After a long pause. Did you tell the sheriff? Dr. Hayes. Shaking his head. Sheriff Turner's a good man, but he's got a family to think about. Chester Wade's got a lot of influence in this town. Tom. Standing up. So you're telling me my brother was murdered, and nobody's going to do anything about it? Dr. Hayes. Sadly. I'm telling you that sometimes justice and the law are two different things. Tom McKinley had always believed in justice, the kind that came from hard work, honest dealing, and treating people fairly. But that night, he learned that sometimes justice had to be taken rather than given. Dusty Creek Church, midnight. Tom stands beneath the oak tree, looking up at the branch where Samuel died. He's brought a lantern, and in its flickering light, he searches the ground methodically. Tom had tracked wounded animals through miles of wilderness. He'd found lost cattle in canyons and ravines. If there was evidence of what really happened to Samuel, he would find it. Tom kneels beside the tree, examining the disturbed earth. His lantern catches something glinting in the dirt, a button, torn from someone's shirt. Tom. Picking up the button. Well, Samuel, looks like you didn't go quiet after all. It was a silver button, the kind that came from expensive clothes. The kind Chester Wade was fond of wearing. Tom pocketed the button and continued his search, but he'd already found what he was looking for. Tom hasn't slept. He sits at his kitchen table, the silver button in front of him. Beside it, a letter addressed to him in Samuel's handwriting. Tom had found the letter in Samuel's saddlebags, hidden beneath his tobacco pouch. Samuel had been many things, but he'd never been a fool. If he'd suspected trouble, he would have prepared for it. Tom opens the letter with shaking hands. Samuel. Reading the letter. Tom, if you're reading this, then Chester Wade finally got what he's been wanting. I know you think I'm just a drunk and a fool, but I've been watching, and I've been listening. Chester's been rustling cattle from the smaller ranches, including ours. He's got Sheriff Turner in his pocket, and he's planning to buy up every spread in the county for half what it's worth. Tom. Continuing to read. I tried to get proof, but Chester caught me going through his papers. He said if I kept my mouth shut, he'd let me live. But I can't stay quiet about this, Tom. I can't let him steal from honest folks like you. Tom's hands trembled as he read his brother's words. Samuel hadn't been running from his problems, he'd been trying to solve them. He'd been trying to be the brother Tom had always hoped he could be. Samuel. Continuing. I know I've been a disappointment. I know I've caused you more trouble than I've been worth. But maybe this one time, I can do something right. If something happens to me, look in the old hiding place behind the church. You'll know what to do. Dusty Creek Church, later. Tom searches behind the church, near the oak tree. He remembers the hiding place, a loose stone in the church foundation where they used to hide childhood treasures. Tom and Samuel had discovered the hiding place when they were boys, playing around the church while their mother visited with the other women. They'd hidden marbles, pocket knives, and later, their father's letters to their mother. Tom pries the stone loose and finds a small oilskin package. Inside are documents, bills of sale, shipping manifests, and correspondence, all in Chester Wade's handwriting. Tom. Reading one of the documents. Ship 50 head to Denver. Mark as Wade's stock. Split proceeds as agreed. It was all their evidence of a cattle rustling operation that had been going on for years. Chester Wade had been stealing from every small rancher in the county, then selling the cattle in distant markets where no one would ask questions. Tom found his own ranch listed among the victims. Cattle he thought were lost to wolves or wandering had actually been stolen. Tom. To himself. Samuel, you magnificent fool. You got him. But the evidence raised as many questions as it answered. If Samuel had this proof, why hadn't he gone to the law? Then Tom remembered Dr. Hayes's words about Sheriff Turner, and he understood. The law in Dusty Creek belonged to Chester Wade. Circle M Ranch, later. Tom sits on his porch, the documents spread before him. He's cleaning his gun again, but this time it's not for maintenance, it's for war. Tom McKinley had always been a peaceful man, but he'd never been a passive one. He'd learned to fight when he had to, learned to shoot when the wolves came after his cattle, learned to do what was necessary to protect what was his. A young girl, Elizabeth Collins, 12, approaches on foot. She's nervous, looking over her shoulder. Elizabeth. Whispering. "Mr. McKinley? My pa sent me. He said to tell you that Mr. Wade is planning something for tonight." Tom. Gently. "What kind of something, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth. Crying. "He's going to burn your house down. He told my pa that if anybody asks, he's to say he saw you leave town." Tom looked at the frightened girl and realized that Chester Wade's corruption went deeper than cattle rustling. He'd turned the town into a place where children had to carry warnings in secret, where good men like Elizabeth's father had to choose between their conscience and their family's safety. Tom. Kneeling down to Elizabeth's level. "You tell your pa that Tom McKinley appreciates his warning. And you tell him that after tonight, he won't have to be afraid anymore." Tom rides down Main Street, Samuel's evidence in his saddlebags. But instead of going to the sheriff's office, he stops at the church. Tom McKinley had spent his whole life believing that justice would come to those who waited for it. But Samuel's death had taught him that sometimes justice needed help finding its way. Int. Dusty Creek Church, continuous. The church is empty except for Reverend Bolton, who's preparing for evening service. Tom enters quietly, his spurs jingling softly on the wooden floor. Reverend Bolton. Surprised. "Tom, I wasn't expecting you tonight." Tom. Removing his hat. "Reverend, I need to ask you something. Do you believe in justice?" Reverend Bolton. Carefully. "I believe in God's justice, Tom." Tom. Placing Samuel's evidence on the altar. "What if I told you that Samuel didn't kill himself? What if I told you he was murdered by Chester Wade because he found out Chester was stealing from half the ranches in the county?" Reverend Bolton. Staring at the documents. "Tom, these are serious accusations." Tom. Quietly. "They're not accusations, Reverend. They're facts." Tom explained everything to Reverend Bolton: Samuel's letter, the evidence, Dr. Hayes's findings. The Reverend listened with growing horror and anger. Reverend Bolton. After a long pause. "What do you want me to do?" Tom. Looking toward the door. "I want you to ring the church bell. Call the town to evening service. Tell them you have something important to share. EXT, Dusty Creek Church, night." The church bell rings across the town, calling people to an unexpected service. Families emerge from their homes, curious about the unusual summons. Tom McKinley had never been comfortable speaking in public, but tonight he had something to say. Something that couldn't wait for morning, couldn't wait for the law, couldn't wait for justice to find its own way. Int. Dusty Creek Church, continuous. The church fills with townspeople. Chester Wade enters with his men, confident and suspicious. Tom stands at the front of the church, Samuel's evidence in his hands. Reverend Bolton. To the congregation. "Friends, Tom McKinley has asked to speak with you tonight about his brother Samuel." Tom. Stepping forward. "Most of you knew Samuel. You knew his faults, his weaknesses. But you didn't know that he died trying to protect this town from a thief and a murderer." Murmurs ripple through the congregation. Chester Wade starts to stand, but Tom's voice stops him. Tom. Louder. Samuel McKinley discovered that Chester Wade has been stealing cattle from every small rancher in this county. He found proof, and he was killed for it. Tom holds up the documents. Tom. Continuing. These papers show 3 years of cattle rustling, forgery, and fraud. They show how Chester Wade has been robbing his neighbors while pretending to be a pillar of the community. Chester. Standing up. This is ridiculous. You can't prove. Tom. Interrupting. I can prove that you were with Samuel the night he died. I can prove that he fought back. And I can prove that you've been stealing from every honest rancher in this county. Tom McKinley had never spoken so many words at one time in his adult life. But 30 years of silence had built up like pressure in a boiler, and now it was all coming out. Tom. His voice growing stronger. My brother Samuel died because he couldn't stand by and watch good people be robbed. He died because he tried to do the right thing. And I won't let his death be meaningless. Tom turns to face Chester Wade directly. Tom. Quietly. Chester, you killed my brother. You stole from these people. And now you're going to answer for it. Chester. Reaching for his gun. You're crazy, McKinley. Tom. Faster. Maybe. But I'm not a thief. And I'm not a murderer. Tom's shot echoed through the church like thunder. Chester Wade fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder. His men reached for their guns, but found themselves facing a congregation that had finally seen the truth. Dr. Hayes stepped forward to tend to Chester's wound, while Sheriff Turner, looking older and more tired than ever, finally did his job. Sheriff Turner. To Chester's men. Drop your weapons. It's over. Tom. Still holding his smoking gun. Samuel McKinley was worth 10 of Chester Wade. He died trying to protect this town, and I won't let anyone forget that. Tom handed the evidence to Reverend Bolton. Tom. To the congregation. Everything Samuel found is here. Every theft, every lie, every crime. Do with it what you will. Tom McKinley walked out of that church a different man than he'd walked in. He'd spoken his piece, settled his accounts, and honored his brother's memory. But more than that, he'd learned that sometimes the quiet man's voice carries the most weight. EXT, Dusty Creek Church, later. Tom stands beside Samuel's grave, the oak tree casting long shadows in the moonlight. The rope is gone, but the tree remains a witness to both injustice and its resolution. Tom. To the grave. I kept my promise, Samuel. The truth is out now. Rest easy, brother. Chester Wade would recover from his wound, but he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. His men scattered like leaves in the wind, and his stolen wealth was returned to the ranchers he'd robbed. But the real victory wasn't in the punishment, it was in the truth. An older Tom McKinley, now 60, stands beside Samuel's grave. With him is a young woman in a graduation dress, Sarah McKinley, 18, beautiful and determined. 15 years passed. Tom McKinley never married, never had children of his own. But he'd found something just as precious, Samuel's daughter, Sarah, who'd been living with relatives back east. Sarah. Placing flowers on the grave. Tell me again about my father, Uncle Tom. Tom. Smiling for the first time in years. Your father was a hero, Sarah. He saved this town, and he saved my soul. Tom had raised Sarah in the same quiet way he'd lived his life, with actions rather than words, with love rather than lectures. And today, at her graduation, she would speak the truth that would finally heal Dusty Creek. Sarah. At the podium before the whole town. My father, Samuel McKinley, was murdered for trying to protect this community. My Uncle Tom saved us all by having the courage to speak the truth. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages. Tom McKinley had spent his life believing that actions spoke louder than words. But on that day, he learned that sometimes words were the most powerful action of all. In a world full of noise, sometimes the most important stories are told in silence. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never ask for recognition. And sometimes, the truth is worth more than a lifetime of comfortable lies. What would you have done in Tom's place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have found the courage to speak? The choice between peace and justice is never easy, but it's always necessary. This was another story here from our channel. If you enjoyed this tale of silent courage and delayed justice, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the stories that matter most are the ones that remind us that even the quietest among us can change the world. The next story is already on its way, and it promises to be just as powerful. Until then, remember your voice matters, even when you think no one is listening.